All right. Hello, everybody. How are y'all this evening? Good. Well, it's good to see everybody. We are back in Hebrews, which will be for a little while. We're working our way through Hebrews. We're in chapter 3 of Hebrews this week, but just a little quick backlog again, just to bring you up to speed real quick. The book itself was written to Christians, as Jews who had converted to Christianity. Chapter 1, we started out saying, the writer of Hebrews started out saying, hey, Jesus is superior to angels. And because, the law had been given to the Israelites via angels, so they're thinking, hey, we've got the old covenant, we have the old law. It was given to us by angels. But so the writer starts out, he's walking through. He's explaining to the people he's writing to why Christianity is superior to what they left. And the first thing he started out with is Jesus is superior to all the angels. And he goes and talks about staying vigilant in chapter 2 and how everything is under Jesus. He goes to that whole piece about, none of the angels were ever called son, and so forth and so on. And he's using all these references from Psalms and different areas to prove his point. Then at the end of chapter 2, I didn't touch on it last week, but I'm just going to touch on it real quick. And it's just a little side piece here. The last little section there, and I'm going to read it starting in chapter 2:14. It says, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people, because he himself suffered when he was tempted. He is able to help those who are being tempted. Now, we talked about that last week right there, but there was just one little quip I didn't get to. Jesus' time, the Jewish people, 1st century, 2nd century, there just wasn't the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the two sects. There was multiple Jewish sects. And it's just kind of like today where you have all the denominations and so forth. They believe a little different. You had the same thing going on with the Jewish people at the time. And one of the things that came out of the Hellenistic Judaism, something called Gnosticism. You very well may hear that term thrown around occasionally, dealing with 1st century Christianity and so forth. And they were really trying to wrap their heads around what really happened. And basically, and I put it here, is a modern name for a variety of ancient religious ideas and systems. Basically, some of them thought, well, Jesus was only a spirit, he wasn't actually human. Or he took over, a spirit took over the guy that was born as Jesus. They had some of these different thoughts that weren't correct. And people will, in general, call those different thoughts, they'll label them as Gnosticism. So if you ever hear that term kind of thrown around, it's beliefs and thoughts, especially back in the 1st century, in that time period in 1st and 2nd century, that were false, that came out of the Hellenistic Judaism is kind of a mixture of Greek philosophy and Judaism and so forth, and some stuff came out of it. It wasn't true, didn't hang around a while. But all of the writing, if you notice how the book of John, how he talks a lot about how Jesus bled, cried, suffered. that was also, it is believed it was also to show people that had that false belief that wasn't correct. And just it kind of came up here, so I wanted to just explain that real quick. If you ever hear that term, it's called Gnosticism. It's just some beliefs from back then that weren't correct and not believed today for the most part. You never know what's believed today. I shouldn't necessarily say that, but it's not mainstream by any means. But if you ever hear that term or you wonder why some of that stuff's there, that may be what it's about. But anyway, put that to rest. Let's move on. Chapter 3. I'm going to read the first 6 verses, of chapter 3. If you'll join with me, this is Hebrews 3, chapter 6. It says, therefore, and we talked about that the last few weeks, he says, therefore, that means, hey, because of what came before, which, Jesus, everything was set under him, he's better than the angels. Since that, holy brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as the apostle and high priest. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all of God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house. We are his house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glory. So, let's step through this a little bit. Whoops, went forward a little bit there. Fix your thoughts on Jesus. What was Jesus? He's saying, don't forget who Jesus was now. I know there was the angels. I know there was Moses. Don't forget Jesus. He was sinless. Son of God. Died for us. And he was faithful. Fix your thoughts on Jesus. Well, a little thing here. It's funny. I'm not going to delve into the whole temple shadow, Jesus in the temple in heaven, all that sort of stuff. But they call Jesus here, just as Moses, as our apostle and high priest. Now, remember, he's talking to Jewish people that had converted. They were used to the high priest and what he did. He was the go-between between the Israelite nation and God. He was the one that made atonement yearly for the sins of Israel. So he's equating Jesus to the high priest, saying he's our new high priest. He is perfect where the high priest here was not. Actually, in the whole ceremony where he killed the bulls and all that stuff for forgiveness of sins for the whole country, he first did it for himself so he would be sinless, and then he would do that for the whole nation of Israel. Remember I had a sermon a few months ago on the scapegoat and where that term came from, and where the high priest would put all the sins on the scapegoat, on the goat, and they'd run it off, and since the term, he was the scapegoat for the nation's sins. So when the writer here is going, hey, Jesus is our high priest, he's the one, he's saying he's our mediator, he's the one that mediates between us and God. He's the one through whom we have forgiveness of sin. So it's not a man, it's the Son of God who has become our high priest. Faithful. And again, he's talking about Moses here. Jesus was faithful, and I'm not taking anything away from Moses, and he wasn't either here. But Moses was shown glory. He was chosen. He was also face to face with God for a while there in Exodus 34. And then he was shown glory in dealing with Miriam and Aaron, and then during Korah's rebellion. That's in Numbers 16, 17, right in there. So Moses, he was, he's not trashing Moses here because he knows who he's talking to, but he's also saying, but Jesus is better. Jesus was sinless. Moses was a great guy. But what is he? He's part of the church, part of the house, part of the building. Jesus is the one who created the church, made it viable. As he says there, if I can digress here, it says, Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as the Son of God, Son over God's house, which we are His house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope which is in glory. So Moses was a great guy, but Jesus built the house Moses resides in. So he's stepping through. He said, Jesus is better than the angels. Pay attention to this. Jesus is better than Moses. And here we go. And then he says, let's see here. Remember, Moses was a faithful servant, but he was never called son. If you think about it, Moses was never called the Son of God. But now I think, and then of course there in the last part of 6 it says, and we are His house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glory. That's what the Hebrew writer's doing. He's saying, guys, I know you've been taught all this, but Jesus is better. Jesus is better. Hold firm. Hold firm. Why? Let's look at this next part. I do like this, and of course we have so instead of therefore, but it's just back to the because of this, that, because of that, this. Back and forth, strengthening his arguments. I'm picking up in 7. But this is directly out of Psalms 95, by the way. This section, a little section here, Psalms 95, 7 through 11. It says, so as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested and tried me. This is a quote, but the quote was from God. Where your ancestors tested and tried me, though for 40 years they saw what I did. That is why I was angry with that generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray, and yet they have not known my ways. So I declare an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. So we've got a picture here of the people that just come out of Israel that are wandering around in the desert. People just came out of Egypt that are wandering around in the desert. That's what that section, that's who God is talking about at that point. The writer of Hebrews is saying, don't forget this. Y'all know this. And then it picks up, he says, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly to the very end, as has just been said. Today, if you hear this voice, do not harden your hearts, as you did in the rebellion. And he repeats himself 2 or 3 sentences right after reading them. Why would he go to the point of reminding them so much? Well, let's think about, he's warning them, of course, don't do what they did. Let's think about a second who he's talking about, who he's warning them. Look what happened back then. They saw all of the plagues. They saw the locusts. They saw the darkness. They saw the firstborn dying. They saw Jesus saying, Egypt, you think your gods are so strong? Watch this. That's what Jesus was doing. All those signs, the darkness. Well, what about the sun god Ra? He couldn't do anything about it, could he? Because he's really not a god. So they witnessed this. And then they were taken out of bondage. By the way, not only were they taken out of bondage, the people were saying, get out here, take my gold and take my silver. Then they go out, then they start complaining. Then they think they're going to die. By the way, they're following a pillar of smoke during the day and a pillar of fire at night. Then they get, quote unquote, trapped up against the Red Sea, and the pillar of fire comes between them and Pharaoh's army. It protects them. Then they see Pharaoh and his army destroyed as they walk across the Red Sea on dry ground. Then they see the water made clean. And then they see manna from heaven, quail from heaven. They see time and time again miracles. They see Moses hit a rock and water come out. Now you got to remember, there's several million people here. And all their cattle and all their goats. Maybe some chickens, I don't know. But anyway, cattle and goats. But no lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Cheryl caught that one. But this wasn't a little trickle. Has anybody here been riding around the mountains and you see a pipe sticking out of a rock and water coming out of it? It's a spring. I know there's a bunch of them up in North Georgia. We used to stop and get water. It's nice and cold and refreshing, mineral water, I guess. This wasn't the case. This was a river had to come out of this rock to be able to water everybody and all the things. I mean, incredible. Incredible signs. God physically, a presence in front of them, guiding them. And what'd they do? They lost faith. They didn't listen to him. As a matter of fact, I had a list of things here. Smoke, fire, crossing the Red Sea, manna, quail, water changing, water out of rock, etc. And they still hardened their hearts. So he's going, hey y'all, this isn't, the Hebrew writer saying, hey, they had all of this stuff. And yet, what happened? This is what we're warning you about. This is what happened. Today, if you hear your voice, don't harden your hearts as they did in the rebellion during the time of testing in the wilderness. Your ancestors tested and tried God. Though for 40 years they saw what God did. This is why God was angry with them. Their hearts were always going astray. They didn't know Him. And what happened? They didn't get to go into the promised land. I shouldn't say they. There were two. They were faithful. But if you think about that, though, the two that were faithful were able to go in. All of the rest were not. And He's telling them what? He's telling them to hold fast. Don't go back. I've already shown you. I know you've been taught this a lot your life. Don't go back. You know the truth now. Jesus is better. Jesus is the way. He's our high priest. Better than anything that has come before. Don't go back. Because he knows, the writer of Hebrews knows, it's easy. Think how easy it is when you had all the people in the wilderness turning away, sinning, becoming, I thought I had this down here, yeah. Oh yeah, he said, do not harden your hearts. They lapsed into indifference. They had unbelief, asking for more signs, like they needed more signs. I mean, really? But this bottom one, think about it. They're going, well, God will forgive me. You ever remember reading in the Old Testament where they're like, well, we're the nation of Israel. Yeah. AD 70, they didn't think Jerusalem was going to fall that time either, or the other time. They said, well, we're God's chosen people. We can go run around and do anything we want. We're God's chosen people. Well, that's not the case. Nor is it the case today. If we're God's chosen people today, we can't go run around doing anything we want. We're told to keep His commands. Stay faithful. Hold on to the end. Paul, finishing the race. Finish it strong. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is trying to stress to the people here that are struggling. And I'm going to pick up here in 16. It says, who were they who heard and rebelled? That's what we just talked about. All the people, all these signs they saw, and yet they rebelled. Were they not all those Moses led out of Egypt, and with whom he was angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies perished in the wilderness? And to whom did God swear that they would never enter his rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. What is he saying? He's saying, hey, we can do the same thing. It's new high priest, new promised land, new covenant. You've been shown the new covenant, told the new covenant, the whole bit. You have to stay faithful. You have to hold fast, is what he's talking about here. Again, this is, as we move through this, if we remember to look back a little bit and see how this flows, it's such an incredible sermon journey as it goes through, as you see how the writer says, okay, Jesus is better. Hold fast. Jesus is better. Hold fast. And now we get into 4. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did. They knew the truth. Now we knew it. But the message they heard was of no value to them because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Now we who have believed enter that rest, just as God has said. So I declared an oath in my anger that they may never enter my rest. He's pulling another section right there out of Psalms 95 that he just reminded them of. And where are we at? We got a couple of minutes. And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words. On the seventh day, God rested from all his works. And again in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter the rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain date, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their examples of disobedience. Their examples of disobedience, the people in the wilderness. The rest is heaven. That's entering God's rest. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joint and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. He's warning them, like we just saw. Jesus is better than Moses. Be careful. Don't fall away. Don't, what were these things I said a minute? Don't lapse into indifference. Don't lapse into unbelief. You've already had enough signs. Don't just presume because you've been baptized you can't fall away. There's a whole group of people that even today believe once saved, always saved. That's just in error. You can't. That's why he's begging the writer. I can just see the writer here of Hebrews just pouring his soul out or spirit out to his brethren, saying, please, 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 don't pay attention. Don't go back. You're going back into death. It's of no value to them. It wasn't. Have value. Take the value in what you have been taught from the Son of God. Please stay true. That's what he's saying. He's begging them. To me, some people may not agree with that, but to me, I can just see him pouring himself out, going, look, don't go back. Look what happened to them. Don't go back. You know the truth. We'll enter his rest if you just stay firm. That's it I have for tonight. Questions, thought, comments? Okay, lest I say, I'll be honest with you. I wish there was more people like the writer of Hebrews. I may be reading too much into him, but we need people that really, really care about other people, not falling away. A lot of us a lot of people are complacent in today's society. I'm not saying that you are, but I think today's society would be better too if we were far more active in trying to remind people and draw people back to God. I love you all. Good to see everybody there. Juanita, Chloe, maybe Trent, who knows? You never know. He's watched it before. Your parents are coming home next week. I won't tell you what they said earlier, just teasing. I hope y'all have a great day. We'll see y'all soon, and hopefully we have this problem. Hopefully we have this problem fixed where we won't have any more problems streaming. We'll see y'all later. Bye.